Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White, and this is the LinkedIn Live show for pre-sales professionals and pre-sales leaders. And today, we're going to have a very candid conversation with Miss Lori Payne. She is the GVP of pre-sales with a company called BlackLine. She and I met, and we haven't met in person like many of my guests. We haven't actually met in person, but we first spoke, I don't know, maybe a month ago or so, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And just in chatting with Lori, I was convinced almost instantly that I needed to invite her to be on the show. She's been in the professional world for over 2 decades. We're just going to leave it there. She's been in pre-sales for over a decade, maybe 15 years-ish, management for about 10. The first time she and I talked, we really clicked, and I was excited to invite her to the show. Lori, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. I'm so excited to be here and definitely glad that you invited me to come on. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Well, as am I. By the way, you already have someone chiming in to say hello. Chris Kramer has said hello. By the way, folks, we don't actually see you, so we don't know who's out there. So if you do care to say hello, please feel free to do so. If you have any questions for Lori or myself, please do so as well. And folks, I always begin these conversations by saying these conversations are unscripted, they are unrehearsed, and they are unpredictable. So now Lori and I have kicked around a few ideas of what we're going to cover today, to include the idea or women in pre-sales. She mentioned to me that she has a real passion to see more women in pre-sales. Before we get into that, Lori, and by the way, let me just say hello to my colleague and friend, Bill Balnave from London. Bill, thanks for chiming in. Good to see you, sir. Lori, do you mind introducing yourself a little bit more broadly and just sharing how it is that you got into pre-sales?
Yeah, I actually kind of fell into it. I think like a lot of people did. I actually got my start in technology working for a software company as a programmer, as a developer. So I spent hours and hours sitting at my desk writing code, and I had no idea how people were using it or the sense of, am I writing being useful for our buyers, our consumers?
Isn't that amazing?
And yeah, right. At some point I said, I got to get out from behind this desk. My personality is a little bit too big to sit behind my desk and not interact with people, not have these kinds of dialogues. So at the time I'd actually asked to move into pre-sales. It was a solution consultant at the time. And they said, no, you don't have enough experience. I was like, okay.
Wow.
As you can imagine, I don't take no's very well. So I said, all right, how do I go get that? So you need to move into professional services. So I spent a boatload of time implementing software. And Chris, that was back in the on-prem days. So it was cut over weekends, go lives. But I did, it was a rough go, but I got the experience I needed. And I finally got my step into pre-sales for a small ERP company based on the East Coast. And never really looked back from there. I dabbled around here and there, but pre-sales was really where it was at. So most of my pre-sales experience is in the ERP space. BlackLine is in the finance automation space. Right. But we connect into ERP. So that has been kind of how I made it here. And it was an interesting journey. And then I waited a bit until it took me a long time to figure out I wanted to lead teams. But by the time I figured that out, I had so much professional experience. I knew what people were going through. I could relate to them, and I could really impact their journeys, which is really what drove me to running teams instead of being an individual contributor.
Yeah. So just a couple reflections. First of all, you mentioned that you were a programmer and found yourself wondering, like, how are people even using what I'm building? That so strikes a chord with me. My first job was with Freddie Mac, and this is the early 90s. I'll date myself. By the way, doing COBOL, DB2, and CICS, so old mainframe technologies. And honestly, not only did I not really fully understand what Freddie Mac did, I had no idea how the business users that I was supporting were using the software or the programs that I was building, right? I'm just doing things based on requirements. So that so resonates with me. What I find particularly interesting is that you recognize that situation and said, you know what, sitting behind a computer, writing software, is not for me. And you actually saw this role of pre-sales. So did you know people in the role? Like, how did you even get, because a lot of people like, I didn't even know this role existed. So how was it that you actually identified the role?
Yeah, so I did. I knew people on the sales team, right? So I got a little bit closer
Mm,
to them. We were all sitting in the same office. This is obviously way pre-COVID. Everyone was in the office then.
yeah,
And I got to know a little bit about what they were doing and who was doing what. And I knew I didn't want to be in direct sales. That I knew was not for me.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
still loved the idea of being attached to that sales organization. They did really fun things. They traveled, they wined and dined, right? They took people to dinners, and the solution consultants went along for the ride. And that I'm not afraid to say was appealing, right? I
Of
wanted to
course.
be in that fast paced, entertaining
Yeah.
environment. Later, I understood, okay, my passion was really like, I enjoy helping people see that there's a better way. And
Mm,
the platform or the technology is a way to help them see that. But at first I
mm.
was drawn in by like the glam of it
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The lifestyle, it's dynamic. You're dealing with people, et cetera.
Yeah.
And you know what I find so interesting is that a lot of people that I speak to, frankly, a lot of people that I've had on this show have said, actually, someone came to me and said, you'd be a good sales engineer or you'd be good in pre-sales. And their response is, what's a sales engineer or what's pre-sales, right? Your story's the opposite. You identified, said, I want to be that. And they said, no.
Yeah. I
They
was
said, no,
told no.
you got to get out into the field. So what did you learn as a professional services consultant, sort of what we used to call a post-sales consultant,
Mhm.
that you think helped you make that transition into pre-sales?
Oh, well, the biggest thing was understanding the solution at that deeper level, knowing its
Mm,
capabilities, knowing its limitations, and really getting that real world experience of how people were using it. So it gave me stories to tell when I
mm,
did make that leap over to the pre-sale side of it, because storytelling is everything, right? You can point and click, and I like to joke, I can train anyone to demo the software, but the storyline that you weave throughout that, and reaching that buying audience with something that
mm,
resonates, stories are the
mm.
piece that do that. And I was really missing that. I had no stories from sitting behind my desk as a developer, as a programmer. No
Yeah.
stories there, right?
Amen. Amen. So the reality, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that even though it probably wasn't very pleasing to hear them tell you you're not ready, the reality is you weren't ready and you needed that time in the field to get that experience and to develop that sort of those real world engagements, so that when you did get into the pre-sales role, you had those stories and that experience to draw from. So,
It makes that role easier. Okay, not to say that for someone who's listening to think that they're never going to make it in there because they're not going to have
mm,
these stories, because there are ways to create those stories. We used to joke like, steal someone else's story and make it your own. Truth be
absolutely.
told, the buying audience is probably not going to know it's not your story, right? Because you can add your own flair to that until you start to build your own. So there is a way to still get into pre-sales even though you may not have that. No, remember, you and I are dating ourselves, right? Back in the late 90s, for me, pre-sales was early 2000s. There weren't these pre-sales academy type programs that I was made aware of to help round out that experience. They just, in my mind, they didn't exist. And I don't
They,
think, yeah, maybe
yeah,
IBM had one or something, but
yeah, they,
it
they
wasn't
didn't
common.
exist. By the way, Bria Bohannon, I hope, Bria, I'm saying that correctly. Bria says hello. She is actually a perfect example of somebody who's actually trying to break into pre-sales. So she and I chatted a few weeks ago, and she actually served our country in the military for 4 years and is now trying to break in. Bria, thank you again for your service to our country, and hopefully this conversation will help you. So Lori, we're going to talk a little bit about women in pre-sales. Before I get there, I'm curious to hear if entering the professional services world as a woman in arguably a technology field, like did you find that there were maybe unique challenges being female, or did you feel like you had maybe certain advantages being female, or maybe a little bit of both?
I have to say, when I was in that professional services role, I was so junior in my career that a lot of those challenges, I think, they were in my blind spot. I didn't even know they were there. But I remember the team I was working with was predominantly female. And
Interesting.
it could be that professional services is a little bit more of a nurturing role, right? You're helping someone along the way. You're helping them get that product up and running, implemented. So at least where I gained that experience, I didn't notice that. However, I do think there's something to be said for women in technology as a whole. I do think we are a little bit underrepresented. I think it's a hard field to break into, whether you're on the engineering side or the sales side or anywhere in between. Technology is just a predominantly male field. And that's something I like to speak about, right? Because it's something I look to bring awareness to and change even just one conversation at a time.
So let's pry that open a little bit further. What do you think? What do you think the challenge is for women, or is there a challenge for women breaking into technology? Is it more of a self-imposed sort of, limiting mindset, or is it the reality of the industry? Is it a little bit of both? What's your perception there?
It is all of that, all of that. And the one thing I can certainly talk all day about is helping women get out of their own way, right? I spoke at a conference once and we were talking about male candidates versus female candidates in that particular context, where you as a male, for example, may say, I'm totally qualified for that role. I don't quite check all the boxes, but I know I can do it. But the way females think about that is we say, well, I don't have that exact experience. I don't check that box. And I am here to say, submit your application, apply for it anyway, because there is no such thing as a perfect candidate. And if you were perfect for that role, you're probably overqualified for it. So go for it anyway. So that's, one thing, right? The way we think about our experience is a little bit different in our approach to thinking about it. There's a top-down challenge too, with hiring managers wanting to hire someone that looks like them, acts like them, behaves like them, which doesn't lead to a very diverse team, which doesn't lead to much success, right? There's a whole lot to unpack with that. And then, another direction we can take this is for women who are in more of a sales-related role, like pre-sales. Either A, you hit the nail on the head, they don't even know it exists, or B, there's this concern of, I'm always going to have to be traveling. There's a lot more pressure. I don't know if I can make that work, depending on where that person is in their life. Are they starting a family? Do they have small children at home? Certainly travel makes that much more difficult. But you and I both know, if you maybe focus on a small to medium-sized organization that doesn't have a lot of travel, you can still break into that pre-sales role. And then as your life at home changes and you have a little bit more flexibility to travel, maybe you then can go to work more large enterprise style deals where it is warranted that you be on site and you travel. So there are ways to do it. And if someone is passionate about the role, I would encourage you to find the right company who's willing to work with you in your life and really make that career choice work.
Really well said. And it is interesting to hear. And in fact, my wife and I have talked about this too. She has said, she's like, you guys have no problem just like putting yourselves out there. Like you're probably not qualified, but you just like,
What do you got to lose?
Exactly. She's like, whereas us women, we do, like, we sometimes come from the mindset of like, we have to check every box and we have to be perfect. And I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if that's DNA. I don't know if that's wiring, or I don't know if that's society, who knows? So I do think there's something to be said about that. I also think that it does seem like there's a certain stigma for women just just in technology, as and also you mentioned the family concerns, right? So
Yeah,
I don't know. I would like to believe that it's changing. I feel like maybe it's getting better, but I don't think we're where we need to be. Do you agree? Like, do you
I
think
agree.
we're getting better?
I do. And of course, everyone's situation is different, right? I like to say I had it all. I had my family. I have, a small, she's 11 now, but when I was traveling all around the United States, I have a really strong partner in my husband. So we went through
Mm,
these different seasons, right? Where
mm,
he was really more of the caretaker of our daughter when I was gone for 4 days a week. And I was really kind of focused on building my career at that. And I'm so fortunate that he was there to allow me to do that, because not everyone can say that, because you can take on those traditional roles where, okay, the women stay home and take care of the family, the men go out and earn the money. But that has really changed in society today. I have so many great friends in the software industry itself that are in the same position I am in, and they've got it all as well. It has its bumps in the road. It is
mm,
challenging. It tests
mm,
things like your marriage, but you can make it work. So society is, I think, coming around a little bit on that, but we're also driving that change too. Like I said, like even just this conversation drives a little bit more change. And if we can just get one of your listeners to say, hey, I can do that. I can make this work. So if it's Bria, right, you can make it work. You can get into this field and you can have
mm.
everything that you may want in your personal life too. We also have to understand, we were just having this whole LinkedIn dialogue. It was a couple of weeks ago with another woman in pre-sales, and we're talking about work-life balance, and that just
Mm,
doesn't exist. It doesn't. And I've really started to change my commentary to be life work integration, right? How do I want to integrate
mm.
work into my life? I do need to
Like
work,
that.
right?
Yeah.
And it is a real big, powerful shift in the way you think about that. And I would encourage everyone to think about it that way. We don't want to be living just to go to work every day. There's so much living that needs to be done. And if you can
Mm.
find a way to balance it all, then great. And sometimes it comes down to setting some very clear boundaries, which can be scary for people to do, right? That big, powerful word of no
Mm.
is a very good boundary setter.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hard for people to do.
Love that idea of work life integration, because you're
Same thing.
right.
Oh, life work integration, right? Life comes
Like,
first.
yeah, life, yeah, well, and good correction, yeah, life work integration. I love, because you're right. It's balance it's almost an oxymoron, right? I mean, it's almost impossible to balance. But I love this idea of integration. I was going to ask you. In fact, I was going to ask permission to ask a very, very direct question.
Please do.
So you mentioned that you had the benefit of your husband at times being more of the caregiver while you were maybe gone 4 days a week. Did you find, even though you had your husband at home, did you find that that was difficult on you as a mother, being gone 4 days at a time, for example, on some regular or consistent basis?
The mom guilt is
Mm,
very real. It's First of all, it's hard to be away from your family for that long. I missed a lot, right? Whether it was gymnastics or something at school. I missed a couple of really cute school things when she was in those early education days. It
mm,
was really difficult. And then of course it's stressful on my husband too.
yeah.
We're in a much different place now with Allison, our daughter, being a little bit older, but that's a very real thing. Even when I travel now, and I'm heading out of town later this week, and he's got to drive her an hour away for her volleyball, and he's got to drop her off at a sleepover. He's got to
Yeah.
do all of that. He has no problem doing it. I don't mean to say it's a big burden for him. He is
Right,
a
right.
very engaged father, but it's challenging, and
Yeah.
being away is hard. You're wondering are they getting fed? Of course she's being fed, but you think about all of those
Yeah.
things, because I'm usually the one that cooks dinner at home. I take on that very traditional role, and that's okay. That's what works for us. But when I'm gone, who's doing that? Of course they're eating dinner, they're not starving.
Of
But
course.
that's the kind of thing that runs through our heads when we're hundreds and thousands of miles away. It's very difficult.
We said that we were going to have a candid conversation, and I do appreciate you being very transparent about that. I will also be transparent. You know, my children, and I started relatively young having kids. So my youngest is 20. She'll be 21 next week, or next month rather. And there are, you know, I've somehow managed to get 4 through, you know, high school and college, but I traveled a lot. And to your point, you know, I tried not to miss too many things. You know, I tried not to miss sports on the weekend and stuff like that. But yeah, even as a father, I certainly experience that guilt from time to time as well, and that's a very real feeling, and that's where somehow, and I love this idea of life work integration. That's where somehow you have to find peace with the decisions that we make and balancing things out. So. In any event, really appreciate your candid thoughts on that. I want to dive a little bit further. I've always thought that women in pre-sales they have a certain DNA that makes them so effective and so good in this role. Do you agree with that? Like it almost seems like it comes more natural to some women than it does, frankly, to some men. Do you agree with that? And if so, why do you think that is?
I don't disagree with it. I've seen some really great male solution consultants, solution engineers as well. But here's what I think it is, right? As we like to talk. We like to tell great stories, right? We're good storytellers. I will sit for hours and sometimes what we do is sit around the table at home and we give each other 3 words and we have to make up a story that uses
I love that.
3 words. It's very good for the mind and so entertaining.
I love that.
It's a little bit of impromptu, right?
Yeah.
So we do those things really well. And I said this before, we're very nurturing and caring, right? So we actually care about the outcome of those meetings that we have with our buyers. And we want to make sure, of course, that we're doing our very best. Every solution engineer, sales consultant, whatever term you want to use, always wants to do their best. But, you know, women, we don't want to fail, right? Especially if we've just taken this leap into switching into this new career. The last thing anybody wants to do is fail. So we're going to give it our all. And I can't guarantee it, but I want to say I guarantee every female SC probably over prepares, but I think a lot of the men do as well. And that's just kind of the nature of an SC, is to over prepare and be ready for whatever comes your way in those customer facing meetings. You never know which way it's going to go, but I think there's some natural skills that we have inherently that make that role a little bit easier for us.
I do too. And by the way, I have to draw attention to a word that you just used that I think is just so powerful. You started to say the outcome, and I thought what you were going to say is the outcome of the sale or the outcome, but what you said is the outcome of the meeting.
Yeah.
And I think that is so powerful because I've said this to a lot of the folks that I work with. Rather than focus on just winning the deal, let's focus on, quote, winning every meeting or making every meeting productive for us and for the people that we're working with. Like to talk about caring a great deal about every interaction, that to me, that's just so powerful. I just love the fact that you said the outcome of the meeting itself.
We have to earn the right to keep moving through the sales cycle. Right? The end result, of course, is the win. We all want the win. But you can't get to that if you haven't earned the right to move on. So it is it's every interaction, meeting by meeting. Yeah.
I've said it plenty. I'll say it again. You want to win more deals, win more meetings. I mean, right? Because what is a successful deal? It's a series of successful meetings, right? Yeah. So I absolutely love that. Lori, let me push our pause button. Folks, I'm speaking to Lori Payne. She is a GVP of pre-sales with a company called BlackLine. They're in the finance industry. She has a background in, is it ERP, CRMs?
Yep.
By the way, Bill Balnave said a few kind words. Thanks for the comment, Bill. By the way, folks, if any of you have any questions for Lori or myself, please don't hesitate to ask. Lori, one of the things that you said that I want to circle back on as well,
Mhm.
you mentioned we were talking about life work balance, and you used the term life work integration, which I love. And you mentioned the use of the powerful word no and the ability to say no. And I think as a sales engineer, this can be particularly difficult when dealing with our sales counterparts. In many cases, we are called into engagements, opportunities, meetings, etc. Sometimes they're well qualified
Mhm.
opportunities, maybe sometimes maybe not as well qualified, maybe there's not. So what advice do you give people? Do you even give your team in managing that relationship with sales? When to say no, if ever, how to say no, et cetera? Because I think for sales engineers, and maybe for women, this might be one of the more difficult situations to manage.
It is hard to say no. I have a
Amen.
personality, yeah, end of sentence, right? I have a
Amen.
personality that likes, I want to be liked by people, right? That's just who I am. I want to be friends with everyone. And when they don't like me, I spend hours wondering, why don't they like me? What did I do wrong? That's just me, right? Not everyone's like that. But you can't say the word no without having a relationship. And you use the word relationship when you were introducing that question. And it comes down to that. You have to have a really solid working relationship with all of your sellers. And they're all
Mm,
different, right? You have to know
mm,
how each one is going to approach things. You have to know, and it takes a long time to build that. You've got to know them all. And you could
yeah,
be supporting a team of 50 different sellers. You could be supporting a team of 2. It just depends on your organizational structure. But you cannot say no without having a relationship with that seller
mm,
because you have to have that trust,
mm,
right? They have to understand why you're giving them the no. And there should be a
right.
dialogue around it. Say, if they're asking you to move to a demo and, making sure lightning's not going to strike, there hasn't been some kind of discovery type conversation, that should be a flat out no, right? Nope,
Yeah,
we're not going to do that. But tell me why you feel like you want to jump right to a demonstration,
yeah,
right? You'd be assuming a whole lot. We get lucky if we won that. There's
yeah, of
always exceptions, but you need to talk
course.
through the exceptions. And having a good sales partner, hopefully they would have like jumped all over that conversation. And here's why I want to take this approach.
Yeah,
Maybe it'll work, right? We can't, you can't say no to trying new things. Trying new things is
right.
okay. But in a case like that, you do want to definitely set that boundary, like not our process, really not acceptable. By the way, what is it that you want me to show? I know nothing about them.
Right.
Very rarely can a seller come to you with a full list of information that's going to set you up perfectly for
Mm,
that next conversation.
yeah,
So that is hard to do, right? Especially for me. Like I want to be liked. I don't want to damage that relationship, and that's the risk that people see is, well, they're not going to want to use me for their next situation, their next opportunity, because I just gave them a no.
right.
So no, in and of itself, is a complete sentence. So you can say, nope, we're not going to do that, but let's talk about why, right? So
Yeah,
expand it,
yeah,
figure out
yeah,
what's going through that particular seller's mind.
yeah.
Um, and you can apply the same thing to saying no to a demonstration at 6 a.m.,
Mm, yeah,
right?
yeah,
That should happen very rarely. But if it's happening to you on a common occurrence, I think you need some more boundaries to be set. And
yeah.
that's a good no, right? Because you can't tell me that prospect has no other time during that week other than 6 a.m. on a Monday morning. I've seen it
Yeah.
happen. I've
Oh
seen
yeah.
it happen.
Oh yeah.
That's a no.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I just so love so many things of what you're saying. I mean, look, at the end of the day, and all the people I work with, I say, we need to make it very clear. And you mentioned relationship. We need to make it very clear to the sellers that we're working with that we are here to do whatever we can within reason to help the team close deals and hit the number, right? That
Yes.
doesn't mean we're going to do anything and everything anytime anybody asks, right? And so you mentioned boundaries. It is setting boundaries. And when when I was in the field, if someone brought something to me, my first response was always, look, I want to do anything I can to help us close deals. It is my job to put my best foot forward on
Mhm.
behalf of the company, on behalf of the product. if I do a demo in this context tomorrow without any information, I am not putting my best foot forward, which means we are putting this deal at risk. At the end of the day, it's your call. Do you want to put this deal at risk by standing me up in front of the customer without knowing anything, right? Not my first choice, and I would like to see if we could do something else, but you've got the final vote here, right? So, and what I just said takes it takes experience, it takes practice, it takes confidence, and really this is what we're talking about. So, given the things that I just said, what are some of the things that we can do? Let's say I'm relatively new, somebody listening to this, relatively new to pre-sales. How can I build that confidence? How can I get that experience? What are some thoughts that come to mind?
So I wanted to jump in while you were saying all that, because I was like, yeah, but it takes confidence and it takes a while to build that. So you're spot on with that, obviously, with all your experience as well. In lieu of that, if you don't know how to handle that situation, but in your gut, you know it feels wrong, you have a manager for a reason, right? Your manager is there to provide a lot of air cover, right? I wouldn't expect someone new to the role to have the conversation that you just described. I mean, amazing if they can, but it just, we don't see that. They're either more junior in their career or they just don't have that confidence. So lean on your manager for that. Hear how they handle that style of a conversation, that type of pushback, and make sure you're engaged with that. So it doesn't look like you're just pawning it off on a manager and you don't want anything to do with that. That style conversation is a learning opportunity for you as a newer pre-sales person to understand, okay, those are the kinds of things that I can ask the seller. Those are the kinds of things that I can push back on and have a conversation around it. So that's one thing I think that people can do, is lean a little bit more on that frontline manager that you have, and until you have that confidence. And then outside of that, because you don't always be running to your manager, it's a very tactical role. They've got a lot going on their plate, and they're probably managing a team of anywhere from 3 to 10 solution consultants. So they also have a lot on their plate. But I would also say trust your gut, right? Something doesn't smell right. Something doesn't feel right. It's okay to either through your Teams chat or whatever platform you use inside of your organization, or an email, and say, hey, can we talk about this? And then that opens up the dialogue. That's also a way to bridge that conversation without saying no. Say, tell me what our plan is here, right?
100%.
And then you start to learn a little bit more, and then you can lean on your expertise, that says, okay, I don't know what we're going to show here. I don't know that we're going to be successful. But to your point, like, I'll do it, but here are the risks, right? Because in all of my years of doing this, I've never seen us lose an opportunity because of the demo. If the demo was a flop, usually you can kind of reel it back and understand there was no discovery. The discovery was 15 minutes. It was with no one that was sitting in, the demo aspect of it. So things were missed.
By the way, Tia, I just love what you just said. Like if we've actually done some discovery with the right people, and we've had enough time to prepare, and we've assembled a story, a narrative, rarely are we going to lose. Now, look, they just might not be impressed, or it might just not be exactly what they were looking for, or that's going to happen, right? But usually failure happens before the big meeting or before the demo, not once we actually get in front of that. Love that. The other thing, and by the way, there's a question from Bria. Bria, I'm going to bring this up in just a minute, but I want to just share this thought before I lose it. You mentioned trust your gut if something doesn't feel right, and I think that you buried the lead there a little bit that I want to make sure we bring to the surface. The only way to trust your gut, the only way to sort of recognize those feelings of like something's just not right here, is to be self-aware and fully mindful of the situation. This notion of mindful, it's interesting. I heard this recently, and it's because you hear a word and it sort of becomes your focus for like a month. Like, mindful is my word right now, right? And what does mindful mean? It just means being present in the moment and paying attention to others, paying attention to yourself, paying attention to what's on your mind or what feelings you're having. I think there's so much power in the self-aware sales professional or pre-sales professional. When you hear me say that, what chord does that strike for you?
I 100% agree. And I think, and I can take that down a different path too, right? Like even having a growth mindset, being able to have a growth mindset starts with being self-aware. Knowing you need to improve somewhere starts with being able to see that you can improve. And that's self-awareness. And I think it applies to all aspects of life, but you have to start there. In order to make any kind of improvements or adjustments, you have to see it first.
Amen.
Yeah.
And the other thought that comes to mind is, and I've had this conversation with a number of people before, the conversation with our sales counterparts. We need to leverage similar skills to the sales conversations that we're having with prospects and customers, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's very similar, right? I mean, we're trying to have influence on people. We are trying to influence people that we don't have direct authority over, whether it's our sales counterparts or our prospects and customers. Do you agree with that?
Yes, because I did a whole presentation about the pre-sales secret superpower, and the whole thing was about influence. And in my research for that talk, I found, and I can't remember who did the study, but it was quoted as saying only 3% of buyers, 3% trust their sales reps.
Wow.
Enter the solution consultant, right? We're not actually trying to get signatures. We're not selling them anything. We're proving out this solution to solve their challenges, solve their problems. There's a lot of power in this role that comes down to influence. So you're influencing your buyers, you're influencing your sales counterparts, you're influencing other people internally to drive forward the sales organization, to drive forward the pre-sales organization. It is a really understated, powerful position, I will say, which kind of leads us to Bria's comment too.
So let's take a look. Let's take a look at Bria's question. Actually, I think there was she dropped. Do you feel as though you have to advocate your value to your AE counterparts or the sales organization as a whole, Bria? And then we'll look at the next comment. But what do you think, Lori?
I think it depends on the organization. So I've been in two types of organizations. One where they fully understand what the pre-sales team brings to the table. And on the other flip side to that coin is the dreaded, I just need you to come in and do a demo. So I've been in both organizations, and certainly being in an organization where the value is understood is way more successful, much more powerful, and really, really fun. And then when you're on the flip side of that coin, where you're trying to help people understand that we're more than just, I'm going to say the words demo jockey. We're way more than that. We bring way more to the table than that, and really enforcing and inserting ourselves in these meetings earlier, having more strategic conversations. It's a tough go, but we've transformed sales organizations in doing that. So it really, Bria, it just kind of depends on the type of organization you're in. Either way, it can be successful. You just might need to speak up a little bit more loudly about what pre-sales brings to the table, right? If we're just showing up to do demos, it's not going to be really a great and fun organization. Your team's going to end up feeling used, right? You just need me to show up and show some product, but we're not adding any value to the sales cycle. So that can be shifted. You've got to do a lot of shifting in the mindset of the sales org as a whole. And that's not easy work, but it can be done.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting. I do think there is a significant delta between some organizations who, to your point, readily recognize and understand the value of their pre-sales and leverage them strategically and leverage them, and those who do not. And I wish I could say it was pretty equally balanced. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it is. And so I do think that one of the things that we have to be doing is advocating for ourselves. It's interesting. I happen to have Bill Balnave wrote a book, the Tech Sales Wasabi, and it's all about SE leadership. And one of the things he talks about, one of the important roles of an SE manager or an SE leader is advocating for their team. And it's not just with sales, it's with marketing, it's with product. We sort of live at this intersection of product and technology and marketing and sales, right?
Yeah.
And I believe the SEs, not only the SE, but SE leaders have to advocate for their teams. How do you feel you need to, or what are the things that you feel like you need to do to advocate for your team, if anything?
Oh, no, there's always advocating that has to be done. Always, right? We have to have a seat at the table. We are such a strategic component of a sales organization as a whole, and to disregard it would be a mistake, right? The company is not going to do as well as it could.
Well said.
And all the way from advocating for getting more budget and understanding why you need more budget for hiring, for training, for technology investment. You have to have a strong leader who's going to do that for your SE organization. You mentioned product, right? We're out in front of buyers day in and day out. We've got crucial information to share back with the product organization. And I've seen that work well and seen that also fail. And we never get features as quickly as we want. That's just the nature of a development cycle.
Yeah.
So accept that now. And then having a seat at that table and communicating with your chief revenue officer, letting that CRO understand exactly how your team, your pre-sales organization is impacting his pipeline, his revenue, both the recurring revenue from the install base and the net new, because many of the SCs now also pull double duty and support the upselling from the install base as well. It is so key to understand how you play that part. And that's not an individual contributor aspect. Individual contributors can aspire to do that, but as the leader of an organization, that has got to be your responsibility to make sure the executive management team understands what your team is doing, what they're bringing to the table, what results they're attaining as a result of the enablement, the training, the technology investment. You have to pull all of that together. It's actually quite fun to do that.
Yeah. Indeed. And you know what came to mind as you were speaking is, and I don't have any scientific proof of this, but I think that SE, the typical SE or the prototypical SE is not necessarily the best self-promoter. I just don't think that's core to our DNA, generally speaking, right? And but by the way, I mean me running my own business, I know for a fact, like, the one thing I don't do very well is market, right? So I do think that we have to, you mentioned growth, I do think that we have to come a little bit outside of our comfort zone at times to be better, quote, self-promoters internally for the work that we are doing in order to get credit where credit is due. Right. And I do think it takes us a little bit outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah, it does. And that's a powerful place to be, right? You step into that uncomfortableness, make whatever changes you need to do to see what the awesome things that are on the other side of that uncomfortability. But you made a really great point. You know, we're not really great self-promoters. If we were, I think we'd be in the sales seat. We'd be selling.
Exactly.
So to your point, some of our personality is we like to be a little bit behind the scenes, yet out there a little, right? Because we're going to own a lot of that sales conversation, particularly product demonstration. When we get to that phase of the cycle, that's all on us.
Yeah.
But outside of that, you know, I think we do like to be brought in at the right time. We'll hang out in the background, and then we'll come in and we'll shine, and then we'll go back away while a seller goes off and gets that signature, typically, right? There are pre-sales organizations that I've seen are a little bit more engaged in that sales cycle, and that's great too, right? They've got a really powerful team that has proven their value. But you butt up against do we have the time to be doing all of those? Do we have the bandwidth to be doing all those types of conversations? That's a whole nother dialogue that we could have about everything that seems to fall to the pre-sales team. SCs are so talented. They end up picking up a lot of work even outside of a sales cycle.
Well, and earlier we talked about the difficulty that people have in saying no. I think that's another common trait of an SE. We just have a hard time saying no, partially because we love demonstrating how capable we are. Right? We love that. We like, to a certain degree. I mean, we want to feel needed. We want to feel wanted. Right? We like to feel important, of course. I mean, everybody likes to feel important, but one of the ways in which we demonstrate our value is to try to take on everything, right?
Yeah.
If it goes too far, it's actually detrimental, not only to ourselves, but actually the organization, right? So this, again, and some of these things are starting to circle back a little bit, right? This is where self-awareness is so important. One of the things I like to say is we are 100% responsible for maximizing the use of our time. Mm-hmm. And just because certain things have been thrown at us is not an excuse for focusing in the wrong places. So look, this is, and I love when we get to this part of the conversation. This is a difficult job. There's no two ways about it. It's an incredibly satisfying job.
It's so fun.
It's an incredibly rewarding job.
It is.
But if we're not careful, it can become very overwhelming. So, Bria, you spawned, I think, that part of the conversation. Really good question. There was one other thought that I had, and people have heard me say this before. Laura, you may or may not have. We are all the CEOs of our own career. At the end of the day, when it comes to advocating for ourselves, there's only one person who ultimately owns that. It's me. So yeah. Take that for what it's worth. Laura, if you can believe it, we've been at this over 45 minutes already. The time always just flies. We've had a great conversation. We will land this plane here in about 10 or 12 minutes. The landing gear is out, the runway's in sight, but we've got a few more minutes here to take advantage of. We've been talking about women in the profession. We've talked a little bit about influence. We've been talking about being very mindful of our roles, managing the life work, not balance, but integration. As you think about our role, as you think about this profession, is there anything else that comes to mind to you as one of the most sort of unique aspects of our job that you think is worth touching on in our last few minutes?
I think what makes this role unique is just where it sits. And we talked about some of this already, right? So we're not quite in sales, yet we benefit from a variable compensation plan, right? Our commissions. We don't have the pressure of forecasting, of hitting a quota, of reporting on our book of business. We don't have that pressure. We have very different pressures. We have a pressure to perform, right? We talked about, earning that right to move to the next meeting after every interaction that we have. We perform, we are always on a stage, some kind of stage, whether it's this virtual stage, I took a team, I think, to Tennessee. I had 5 SCs. They were literally demonstrating on a stage to an auditorium full of people. So you can be on that literal stage as well. And those are skills that not everyone has, right? So those kind of more softer skills, I like to call them, your presentation skills, your ability to influence, like we talked about. I think everyone can benefit from having them, but we nurture them, we build them, we hone them and fine tune them more so, I would say, than our sales counterparts, because that's our profession. It's what we do day in and day out. So it's really unique in that sense. And then how we cross over all of these different departments inside of an organization is also unique, right? We touch a lot within
Mm.
from marketing, right, to supporting marketing events, to doing their webinars. Across the board, we talked about product. Of course, we touch sales, support sometimes, right? We work with services and the delivery team on the implementation team to make sure that our buyers are getting what they signed up for. It's really a unique role, and it's really quite special. It doesn't have its challenges, yeah, but to your point earlier, so fun, so rewarding. And it's one of those little known roles that people, they don't know about it unless they've kind of grown up in software.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully conversations like this and the things that the PSC is doing. In fact, I'll be in San Francisco. I fly to San Francisco tomorrow. Vivint is having a full day conference on Wednesday. So hopefully the word is getting out a little bit more. Chris Hickey said, hopefully there's a replay. Yes, folks, this will stay on LinkedIn. So anybody can catch the recording. Lori, I think I have one more question, unless you say something that triggers another question. So I can't
Fair
promise
enough.
this will be my last question. But the question that came to mind to me is, if you could go back to yourself when you first made the transition into pre-sales and give yourself a piece of advice, what might that be?
Oh, that's a heavy question. And I love it. I love it. Okay, I don't know that there's one piece of advice. I really don't. And I might just be able to boil it down in something like believe in yourself. Believe that you can do it. Know that you're in the right spot. Know that someone saw the potential for you to be effective and successful in that role. And we could go down a whole path of imposter syndrome, but so many times when I was starting and jumping into a demo, the nerves would take over. I was trained. I knew the solution. I knew how to present, but you still wonder, like, am I really the right person to do this? Shouldn't someone else be on this with me? So believe in yourself, right? Quiet down all that other noise, I think, is probably something I would love to tell my younger self.
How long do you think it took you to overcome that feeling?
I would say it probably took a good year to overcome that feeling of self-doubt. But I firmly believe it takes a good 3 years for you to be an exceptional solution consultant or solution engineer. There's just so much to fine tune and tweak, and then you're never really done. But I like to say it's 3 years, but a year in, you're going to be highly productive. And I think that
Yeah.
depends on the environment that you're in and how big of a solution you're selling, how comfortable and how comfortable you can get with that solution. So it
Yeah.
varies, but those are my general timelines.
I agree. And it's interesting. I think it takes at least a year to really sort of hit your stride. I think it takes probably 3 years to really become what I would call a professional sales engineer. And then I think what's interesting is that I think when we hit, I've met a lot of people that hit the 5 to 7 year mark, and if they haven't moved into maybe a management role, a leadership role, they start to get a little bit complacent, and they start to, I think, sort of rest on their laurels,
Yes.
as we say. And I'm curious, did you ever recognize that in yourself, or did you move into management quickly enough to just maintain that momentum, so to speak?
Yeah, I personally moved into a managerial type role after I had that amount of experience. But I see that in some of our most senior pre-sales professionals. They become almost unwilling to try new things. I've proven myself. I know how to do this. Whatever you're going to tell me, I've tried or I've done that. And I find that a very challenging mindset because there's always something to learn in this profession. There's always something you can improve on. You may think you've had an incredible amount of success, but if you found that one little tweak that gave you 10, 15% more success, imagine what that would be like. So that's one of the reasons why I'm a huge advocate of having a growth mindset. There is always something you can improve on, always.
I love that. And something you said earlier that I meant to quote double click on is you mentioned pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone.
Yeah.
And to me, it's one of those sort of unfortunate truths of life, right? That all growth lives on the other side of discomfort, right? Like we have to move ourselves out of comfort, right? Out of the comfort zone and feel that discomfort in order to grow. Yeah. Well, now that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, but there's something so amazing on the other side of it that I promise you it's worth it. It's hard. You got to put in the work though. It's hard and it's scary, but it's so worth it.
Really, really, really well said. By the way, a LinkedIn, and we don't, it just says LinkedIn user. So we're not sure who it was, said, I needed to hear that. Thank you. I think that was the advice you gave your younger self. And Steven Cedar, I hope I'm saying that right. Very good interview, and I couldn't agree with you more, Stephen. Lori has been a great interview. Lori, we're going to wrap things up here. Any closing thoughts from you before we put a bow on today's conversation?
I would say if you're considering making a leap into this amazing profession, do it. If you are a female in technology, get out of your own way, do it anyway, because it's an amazing place to be.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm gonna may I add one item to that?
Of course.
Provided you mentioned being on stage, provided you feel comfortable on stage with the spotlight shining on you. If you don't like being on stage with the spotlight shining on you, maybe not. But if you have any like if you're looking at this, you know, if you're looking at this profession, you're like, I think I might like that, but I'm not so sure. You probably would do well. Yeah. Lori, thank you so much for joining me on the. I knew this was going to be a good conversation, and it did not let me down in the least.
Excellent.
I hope you'll come back. And join me sometime, folks. For those of you who hung around the whole time, thank you so much. If you like this and you haven't already, you can follow #TechSalesAdvice or Tech Sales Advisors. You can, of course, go to techsalesadvisors.com to learn more about the work that I do. Lori, hang around backstage just for a minute. Sure. I want to give you your parting gift. For everybody else, thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next week on Tech Sales Advice. Lori, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, all.